Politics, Game of Thrones, Servant of the Empire, Goblin Emperor, Kushiel, betrayal, power, war, all of that stuff. How do you bring that into an RPG? Well, if you click like, and you share, and you subscribe, I'll tell you how. Alright, now you've done that, haven't you? Let's talk about it. Now, I've actually had a lot of problems with this script because the topic here is so theoretical and can be so specific, and it's such a big thing to talk about. So instead of focusing on theory, I'm going to talk a little bit about broader themes, and I'm going to tell you how I do politics in my games, which I do in every fantasy game, simply and directly. And I've been doing this for a really long time. Now, firstly, your game is already political. A political game is anything in which two or more factions want two different outcomes of society and are striving with little or no violence. And that's ultimately what politics is. Competing ideas of what society should be and the gaining of the power to make that vision happen. Your game is already political because you're already going to have structures that are political just by their very nature, just by their existence. Are your characters free to adventure? Well, then you're a citizen with some free right of movement. You're allowed to have arms, aren't you? Politics. That's politics. If you can move around freely, that's a political decision that's been made somewhere. Can your characters read? If you've got a wizard, probably can. Is it legal for people to read? Did you learn in school? Those are all political decisions. Are you a cleric? That means there's a priest class. Almost certainly. What influence does the church and the god have on politics? Do you carry weapons? Is it legal for anyone to carry a weapon? For everyone to carry a weapon? Did you learn how to fight in an army? Or are you just some sort of private rabble? Or are you the knight of a count? These are all politics. Is there a city watch? Politics. Do you have laws about magic? Politics. Do you have zero laws? Politics. Politics is just ideas about society. And a trick to doing politics in your fantasy game is to find where politics impacts on players and where players interact with politics. Now, before we get too far into this video, a bit of word of warning. Political gaming is not for everyone, and for a few reasons. Firstly, a lot of people who like these sorts of narratives might not like playing them because it's a very different experience from the more action RPG elements that many prefer. It's a lot of prep work for a DM, guys. I'm not going to tell you have to keep track of lots of NPCs, you have to understand the laws of your kingdom, you have to keep track of your factions and the people in the factions, and it can be done, and it's really rewarding when you get it done, but it's definitely something you have to work at. And this is some practical, hard-won experience. In political games, a lot of the time you will be portraying lots of characters, lots of NPCs, sometimes all at once. And a lot of the time as well, PCs might not be the stars of the show in political games in the way that they are in other games. If Jon Snow is the PC, then, King Joffrey is the NPC. And King Joffrey is kind of like more important to the overall storyline of Game of Thrones. So you might feel, as a player, that you are deprotagonized, and when you're deprotagonized, you can feel distant from the story and you can find it boring. So instead of jumping headfirst into a political game, I would highly recommend that you just do a regular kind of D&D game and then slowly introduce some political elements into it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Now, we need to think about politics at the very outset of the campaign. When you as a DM are thinking about doing a campaign, it doesn't matter what the world is set in, you need to just have some thinking about political elements. Now, I'm going to just do Western medieval fantasy, but you don't have to do it this way. It's just that this is familiar. Change King to Shire if you like, change Baron to Mandarin, doesn't really matter. Now, first of all, you need to have a king. And kings should be very distant figures. We can bring them in, but at the beginning of your campaign, just leave them off stage. Then there's dukes. Now, dukes were in charge of 100,000 or even 1 million people. Think of them as the premiers of a state or a governor. And under them are barons. And yes, for medievalists, I'm leaving out loads and loads. Again, this is just a simple practical guide. Now, barons oversee a few dozen to 100 or so wards. And a ward is maybe a dozen families, a dozen farms, a small town. And maybe you were the baron of a specific city. A very important city like Rome or London might have its own baron. That would be, say, 10,000, 20,000 people typically. They could go on to be as big as 1 million, but they were extremely rare. And I think that baronies, say 20,000 people, are the sweet spot for you to start a political campaign and to base it around that level. 10,000 people is a few small towns. 10,000 people is enough that your families might be involved, is enough that you can know a lot of the important people, enough that you can be much more individually involved in the politics. Now, under barons come knights, and these rule perhaps 500 people. There's a reason why everyone wants to be a knight, wants to get knighted on the battlefield or whatever. It's because you get a piece of the action from 500 people's taxes. And under knights, there's serfs, or peasants, whatever they're called, the working class. Farmers, fishermen, builders, reeves, blacksmiths. You can add guilds if you like, political associations of working people, up to you. And then there's the church. Now, sometimes churches are very close to the king and the state. They're allies, and sometimes you've got considerable tension between the church and royalty. And something to think about is how active are the gods in your world? How much do they pay attention to politics and to the doings of mortals? And how much does the church think that this gives them authority over the temporal world? And also, royals are often royals because they claim that the gods chose them. That's the divine rights of kings. So, there you go. You have a basic society. Fleshing out those roles and answering those questions might give you a better idea of how politics is going to look in your campaign. Then, you'll need a few NPCs. Who is the Baron? What's her deal? Who are her servants? What is her church like? Who is the highest ranking cleric in the area? What legal rights do the church have? What ability do they have to get taxes? To pass laws? To influence people? Is it all very informal? You should do what I say or you'll go to hell, versus you should do what I say because it's the law. In your local town, in your local ward, is there a mayor? Is there an alderman? Now, these people are supposed to be advocates of the peasants to the local barons, but are they? I mean, someone like that would be very easy to corrupt. Hi, here's 100 gold. Tell the peasants to sod off. I don't want to hear from them. And what is the law like? And you've got to remember is that there were no police until the 1700s. The best you got is constables and sheriffs, who are usually just the local tough guys and are usually just informally organized by the church. So how is law enforced? In medieval times, normally you send a knight with a sword and justice was brutal. Then I map out the relationships between these NPCs and institutions. And I mean physically map it out. I do their names and their organizations they represent. I draw arrows between them and I say enemies, friends, allies, whatever. So, for example, which of the 20 or 50, 100 knights are loyal to the Baron? Who is against him? Which knights are basically good guys? Which knights are basically bad guys, allies to the PCs, enemies to the PCs? What's the Baron's relationship with the church like? How's the Baron treat peasants? You'll immediately start to see story hooks. Oh, okay, so these two guys, they might hire the PCs to mess with one another. They're rivals. Oh, that guy's religious. He's good friends with the church, so he might really be into the party paladin. Okay. That's what you're doing the map for, because you'll immediately start to see emerging story ideas and adventure ideas come out. Now, when you've done that, this is the time to talk to your players. You either need to pitch to them or have them decide what their involvement with this level of the campaign is. They must have links to the political side of the campaign from the very beginning, from session 0, or it probably won't work. Are they servants of the Baron? Are they relatives of the Baron? Are they a knight? Are they all knights? Barons gain glory by having households full of retainers. A wizard or a bard would be a fantastic addition. A famous knight. Maybe you're a rare monk who's being patronized by the Baron to train his soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. Perhaps all your PCs are peasant and they friggin' hate the Baron, and they are always personally dealing with corrupt and brutal knights and their horrible constables. Robin Hood is a political story. So, okay, you've set that up. Great. Here are some adventures that I have personally used to introduce political elements to a fantasy narrative. There's an orc raid in the village. You follow them back to their lair and you find a note. And the note is from a knight who's from the county over. And apparently she organized all this. What? So, she wants to bring your county under her rule and use that combined power to challenge the Baron. There you go. That's politics. Secondly, the local Baron is a vampire. So, okay, you figure that out. You stake him. Yay, heroes. Now, according to ancient custom, you are the new barons. That's how the ancient rights go. You didn't want to be, but that's the law. So what happens when two neighboring barons, both of who want to absorb your barony into theirs, go, New meat. Do you want to be barons? Do you let them come and absorb it? Do you take bribes? What if they offer you 500,000 golds to do it? Number 3. Now you know that a great evil is going to incarnate in your kingdom, in your barony. You can't possibly destroy it by yourself, you're only 3rd level, and if the people find out that the ancient evil is coming back, there will be a panic. So you're going to need to find out which knights are likely to listen to your warnings, which knights are likely to help the PCs get the power they're going to need to defeat this ancient evil. Your PCs will need to prove themselves maybe to the church as well. Get the church on their side to get a hold of the church's ancient weapons and magic. So already you're seeing that who are you going to please, the knights or the church? Who comes first? Are these two factions in opposition to each other? And then, sooner or later, someone will find out what's going on. Someone will find out the secret of the ancient evil rising. And then, a little bit of a twist, who behind the scenes is on the side of the ancient evil? Any kind of adventure idea that has you brush up against church, against knights, against barons, against anything like that is going to be political. What happens if you find an ancient sword that says that you are now the baron? Do you take that to the baron and say, you can have this, and say that you found it if you like for 100,000 GPs? Or do you say, well, I found the sword, I'm the new baron? What happens when you accidentally raid a neighboring city-state and you go back to your homeland, you go back to your county or whatever, and that neighboring city-state comes to your baron and says, why did you send agents to destabilize me? Immediately, anything that you can do that brushes up against law, that brushes up against society, that brushes up against the entrenched political powers of the world as you as a DM have made them, makes for a political adventure. And then once you've run a few of these adventures where you are brushing up against the political structures of the campaign world, you will know a lot more whether or not you like to run them as a DM. You'll see whether or not your players respond to them, and you can therefore bring politics more into the campaign, or you can just leave them aside and go and punch a dragon in the face all goddamn day if you like. I can expand this more if you like. It is a pretty complicated subject though, so we'll see if we can get 100 views or something, and I'll come back to this. I'm Christian Reed, this is Crowland Publishing. Again, please like and subscribe and all that jazz, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye now.